He even told my mother that he didn't believe in God, you know. Uh, that's why he'd never go. But my mother would take us when she could, you know. Having two little ones. When my dad got killed, my sister was 4, my brother was 3. She was either 4 or 5, and he was either 3 or 4. But they were like 6 and 7 years younger than me. Uh, I was born during the war in '43, and when he came home after the war in '48 or '49, then that's when she had the other two. But 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 if you want me to just talk and just give you some
Yeah,
background on
tell
my
me a little bit
dad,
about your dad. So he was a coal worker.
coal miner, started at the age of 12.
Wow.
Most men, most poor families back, because everybody was poor. I mean, there was nobody there with college degrees. These were immigrants that came from Yugoslavia, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Italy. They came over here. They worked in the steel mills and the coal mines, and most of them had 5, 6, 7 kids. You know, my dad's generation, and the young ones had to work. The girls had to do some kind of work, you know, the boys had to do some kind of work. So what would happen back then is like the father, or if they had an older brother or maybe an uncle to live next door or something, they would take them in the mine and train them. And they would usually start taking them in around 12 years of age. So my dad went to 6th or 7th grade, and that was it. So at the age of 12, he had to grow up real fast. Okay, and but he wasn't the only one. I mean, probably half of the guys had to do that. And my dad somehow was blessed with a good pitching arm. And every town had a baseball team. Baseball was 100 times bigger than football, basketball, soccer, anything. And he became a real good pitcher. And Stan Musial, he's in the Hall of Fame. He's from Denora, was same age as my dad, and he was a pitcher. And my dad and Stan Musial were the two best pitchers in Western Pennsylvania. And they got signed by a scout from St. Louis to play for their team. And my dad went to spring training one year, and I think he went to spring training, and then I don't know the whole story, but the war well the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor like 6, 7 months after that in December 1941. So my dad joined the army. He went to Europe for 4 years, and when he came home, uh, he notified the ball team that he's alive and well, and he wants to know if he still has, a chance to make the team. And they said, sure, you come to spring training in February, and this was like September, October. The war was over in August, and by the time everybody came home, it took a couple months. So he was home during the autumn and like the winter months. And he went into mine to work, because he needed to feed the kids and everything. Uh, he went to work, he worked only a couple weeks. He was a roof bolter, most dangerous job in the mine. You have big 8 foot bolts, and you put this thing on your shoulder, and you press a hydraulic. It's like a jackhammer, and it jackhammers bolts into the roof of the mine so the mine doesn't collapse. Well, he did that for a living. Okay, that's what he did. and the mine did collapse right underneath him. They had no protection, nothing over top of their heads or anything. Where like now they have machines where you push a button and you have iron all around you, a cage. Unfortunately, broke his left shoulder. And my mother said he was like devastated when that happened, because that was his dream, you know, to be a ball player and to make good money and support his family and stuff. And so he told his team what happened, and they says, well, we'll get a hold of you. But they never did, I don't think, after that. And so he played Sandlot. He played for like Bentleyville. He played Sandlot for, maybe 3 or 4 more years. He was still a young guy. He was 24, 25 years old. And then he stayed in the mine. And then about 5 years after that happened, 6 years after that happened, he was bolting again. And that's when he got smashed. He got crushed. And that's when he died in 1954. But between when he come home and 1954, those 5 or 6 years, I think he just I was a baby, so I'm just saying, but I just think he just became so discouraged and bitter and, mad at the world, mad at God. Stan Musial went on to play 22 years in the majors. He's probably one of the top 10 or 15 baseball players of all time. Look it up on your computer. And they didn't make millions back there, but when people made $2,000 or $3,000 a year working in a coal mine, Musial was making $25,000, $30,000 a year pitching, And I think maybe that's why my dad got so angry. Hopefully I'll find out. And mad at the world and just, discouraged. And
so how did he treat you kids during that
time? I never had a relationship with my dad. I mean, I can't tell you one happy day I had with my dad. He was quiet. He didn't talk much, but he was never happy. You know what I mean? He went to work every day, and he drank every weekend, He'd drink a whole paycheck, He'd leave Friday night. My mother wouldn't see him till Sunday. So he must have had girlfriends somewhere or something, And he'd come home, he'd still be drunk Sunday morning. And this is what happened on that Sunday. My mother, you ever see those galvanized wash tubs?
Mm-hmm.
The old people used to wash their clothes in? Well, that was our bathtub. My mother would run water from the kitchen sink into that. And my sister and my brother, she would bath them together. And then I'd take my bath and we'd get ready and we'd go to church, So my dad come home while we were doing that. And, I don't know if he was cussing or what, but he was yelling and screaming. He was hungry and this and that and blah, blah, blah. And I guess my mother told him that, well, we're going to church. I got to bath these kids first or whatever. And he started laughing. He started laughing at her for going to church and taking us to church, And then the next thing I knew, he didn't even change his clothes. He smelled like a bar. My mother said this later, he stunk and she was embarrassed, you know. He must have washed his face a little bit and cleaned up. He said, I'm going too. And he went. And everybody was shocked because everybody knew Lefty. There were 2 or 3 drunks in town, and my dad was one of them. And he'd never been in a church. He'd never gone to church. So I don't know when she told him this, when she told me this part. I think it was maybe 20 years later, because I don't remember knowing this when I was still in grade school, junior high, and high school. I think it may have been when I joined the church, because I was giving my mother Bible studies and stuff, and then bought her a Bible and all of this, and she told me the story, and I never knew the story about what he said. He was never one to give compliments. He never, even if my mother always dressed clean and neat. We had no money. She made her own dresses out of sometimes burlap sacks, and she'd dye them or whatever, She made my blue jeans till I was in junior high school. My brother and sister's blue jeans or little dresses. My mother could sew. He'd never compliment her. He'd never say, boy, that was really good soup, or that was good. He'd bring drunks home 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. We want to eat. And she'd have to get up and make a dozen eggs and, do this and do that. But she said, when I was probably, I don't know, I might have been 30 years old, but I was older already. I don't think she told anybody until the kids were grown up to just tell them, And she says, your dad complimented me, how pretty I looked, my clothes, the food. She says, he never said that. She says in like 12 years of marriage or 13 years of marriage, And that night, and she says he had a quarter in his pocket left from his pay, whatever he had. And he put it in the offering plate. And he told her, that was the best quarter he ever spent, And he can't wait to go back. He went to work. I remember him going to work because he was working midnight. He didn't have a car. But guys would come and pick him up and take him to the mine. The mine was in Cokeburg. We lived in Bentleyville. He left around 10:30 to go to work. 2 o'clock in the morning, somebody knocked on our door. It said Lefty got killed. That was it. And I was mad. I was sort of mad at God. I was the only kid in 6th grade, didn't have a father. The only kid on our basketball team in junior high that didn't have a father go to see him. High school, He was going to teach me how to pitch. I pitched a little bit in Pony League, in Little League, and But then after he died, all of his buddies that worked in the mine with him, that knew him his whole life, tell me what a great pitcher he was, and this and that, and and they all felt sorry for us kids and all of that. But my mother said that was the only day in his life that he was like happy. He at least talked to her in a nice tone, or and he didn't just yell at her, give me food, or go here, or do that, or whatever. He wasn't a nice person. And I'm thinking maybe it's because of that baseball thing. That, because he was really looking forward to being successful. And
So what do you think? Why that day do you think he decided to go to church?
I have no idea. Holy Spirit must have talked to him. Had to. Because he wouldn't even, I mean, that wasn't the first time he came home Sunday morning and we went to church. We had to walk like a mile to church. The church was right downtown Bentleyville, the Presbyterian church. It's still there, right on Main Street. It's a red brick church right before you come to the red light. And we lived towards Interstate 70. Wasn't there then, but we lived on that end of town, at the end of town. And it was about a mile to walk to church. And my mother and me and my brother and sister, we would walk to church, whenever we went. We'd go a couple times a month, and he walked to church with us. My mother was like, she was beside herself. She said she didn't know what to think. And then he come home, he bragged about her, whatever she made. He bragged about the food. I didn't hear this stuff or any, because, I'm playing with my brother and sister, and we're outside, and she said he was like from black to white, or white to black. He was just totally different the whole day. And before he left, he said, I guess him and her talked, because they never even hardly talked unless he was screaming at somebody, and she says, he said he can't wait till next week to go again.
And it was the next day he died?
3 hours.
3 hours later.
Well, he left home 10:30, because I think they work on third shift, 11 to 7, and they usually left about 10 o'clock, maybe a little bit later. The mine was 15 minutes away, so they had to go in the mine and, put their gear on and everything. He didn't bring all of his stuff home with him. They took a shower at the mine and changed clothes. But 3 hours later, maybe 3.5, 4 hours later, 2 guys come knocking on the door. My mother knew them because small town, everybody that either works in the mine or in the mine office, or
So the mine was in operation on Sunday?
Yes, Sunday night, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I mean, sometimes they would work 7 days a week.
Wow.
Most of the time it was 3 or 4, because it was flooding.
Yeah, right.
They have to get pump it out for a whole day, or something broke down. It wasn't as modern as it is today.
Yeah.
It was still some pick and shovel stuff, and drill a hole, put a half a stick of dynamite in there, and run around a corner, and they would crack it, and you'd get a pick, and you'd pick your coal out and put it in a coal car, and yeah.
So how did you find peace in dealing with his death? Why do you think God would take him to church and then allow him to die?
I didn't understand that. I didn't until I joined the church, until I started reading the Bible, until I took Bible studies, and until I learned about Jesus, you know. Uh, I wasn't angry at God where I hated God, but I was disappointed, you know. Why does my dad have to die? Even though I didn't really like him. I don't remember one conversation I had with my dad. I stayed away from him. He came home, I went over to neighbors and played. I played till my mother would call me, Nicky, come on, 9 o'clock, time to go to, you've got to go to bed. Uh, yeah, it's a shame. I only knew my dad for 5 years, from maybe like 6 to 11. I just turned 11 years old when he got killed. Yeah, after I started going to church and seeing what God really is like, that He is a kind, loving God, and to save you, sometimes He has to do drastic things. And in my heart, I wanted it to be He took my dad so He could save him. And if that's why, I just praise God. Even though I didn't like him, and I thought I can't wait till I grow up, I'm just going to beat him to a pulp. But my dad was pretty husky and strong. He was strong. He wasn't real big, 5'9", 5'10", but
You must get your height from your mom then.
my uncle on my mother's side, my Uncle Matt, was 6'4", 6'3", 6'4". My dad's dad was 6'4", 6'5". My other uncle says he was taller than that. They called my dad's dad Tarzan. He was the strongest man in Van Voorst. That's where they were living, a little coal mining town outside of Bentleyville. And my dad's dad died in that pandemic flu in 1919. My dad was only like a year and a half old when his dad died. So he never had a dad. My grandmother, people back in those days, if they had a room, coal miners would want to have a place to sleep. So they called them boarders. So my Bubba, my grandmother, Bubba means grandmother in Hunky, okay? She had 3 or 4 boarders. She cooked for them, she washed her. She was like a maid, but they stayed there, and then they paid her $1 a week or whatever they paid. So one of the boarders and my grandmother never got married. It was common law married, and they were married for 50 years, 40, 50 years. And they both died when I was in 12th grade. My dad's mother and my dad's stepdad. Yeah. I know from reading the Bible, it says Jesus is the relentless pursuer, and that you can never give up on anybody. As long as they're breathing, Jesus will try to save them. And if I had never joined our church, if I had never learned from the Bible what God is really like, He's not out to get you, He's out to save you. If I didn't know that, today probably I wouldn't think there's any chance for my dad. But knowing how good Jesus is, Uh, if he could save me, he could save my dad. That's how I look at it, you know. But you have to know Jesus, I think, before you could understand that. Because if you think, you know, like some people say, well, when I was little, the people didn't know any better. My grandmother and grandfather lived across the street from us. We lived with them when I was little. And they lived catty corner across the street from us. And every time my dad would come home and make trouble, like the night he tried to shoot us, like the night he chopped up the bedroom furniture, and other nights. There was more than one or two. My mother would grab the kids and we'd run to her mother and dad's house. And then my uncle lived upstairs, my grandparents lived downstairs. Somebody would call the cops and the cops would come and take my dad. The night she hit him with the ball bat, she cracked him pretty good. The doctor came, stitched him up, they wrapped his head up, they put him in jail for a couple days, and when he come home, he still had the wrappings on his head, you know. And shortly after that, it wasn't very long, it was maybe a couple months, because I think I was like 11 years old then. That's when he got killed. Those two things, I think, were within maybe 6 months of each other. Maybe a lot less than that, but I can't remember exactly. But yeah, you have to know how good God is to understand that. Because I wonder, why does my mother have to work so hard? She didn't go to school maybe till 5th or 6th grade either. She did men's work, you know. She loading trucks with tow motors at the Foodland store, and I mean just, you know, and scrimping and scraping. She had a hard life. There was no man to help her out, and she wouldn't get married for 20 years because she didn't want anybody to raise her kids and beat her kids, she said. So she did it by herself. And after we were all married and gone, she married a guy who lived right across the street from me. I was already married. I was living in Ellsworth. And this guy lived right across the street from me, and his wife died. And everybody knows everybody. My mother knew him and his wife for years, and he was an alcoholic. I says, Ma, don't get messed up with him. She says, oh, I know, you know. She ended up marrying him. He was a drunk, but he never touched her. He'd get drunk and just fall asleep on the kitchen floor, and he'd lay there for a day and a half. She'd have to step over him. But he never raised a hand to her. But he was an alcoholic, but he wasn't like my dad. That's a demon. You know, that's a demon. He had demons in him. And I mean, try to kill your kids and your wife, and to beat them for no reason. My mother was always had a black eye, or her lip was swollen, or she had bruises on her neck or her arms. And when I was little, I didn't understand. I mean, I didn't know what was going on. You know, I mean, I sort of, but I didn't. But then after I was old enough to, you know, when I was 3 or 4, I didn't know. But when I was 8, 9, 10, 11, I knew. And I said, I'm either going to kill him or I'm going to beat him to where he wishes he was dead. But he didn't live long enough for me to do that. Praise God.